Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to the Halftime Talk feature interview series. And I'm delighted today to be joined by Dr. Mohammed Al Sabban, who is a former senior advisor for the Ministry of Petroleum and Mineral Resources in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Dr. Mohammed, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on your program.
Well, it's great to have you. And of course, dynamic times for the energy markets on all fronts. And we'll try and get through as many questions to you today as we can. I'd like to start by talking about Saudi Arabia's oil production at the moment and what you would see as its ambitions going forward. We'll talk a bit about OPEC later, but we have production where it is today in terms of investment in production, not necessarily what it's producing or exporting, but its plans to increase capacity. Further, we see very ambitious plans, for example, next door in the UAE. But is Saudi Arabia focusing on growing its oil production capacity, or does it have its sights set on other things such as gas and, of course, the whole renewables trajectory as well?
Thank you very much for this interview. Saudi Arabia is doing both, increasing production capacity to 27 million barrels per day. And at the same time, they are diversifying energy sources and not limited to oil and gas. As you said, we are developing renewables. We are developing hydrogen power, even nuclear. By the end of this year, we will have the first nuclear plant in Saudi Arabia, and we are planning to provide electricity to our neighboring countries, including Iraq and Egypt. And we are working day and night in order to diversify not only the economy, but also the energy sources. And we will be energy sources exporter in the very short period.
Okay, and Dr. Mohammed, I mean, you mentioned diversification. Of course, that's a big part of Saudi's 2030 vision, its economic plan, and really ambitious projects within that. How is that going? And what would you see as perhaps the lessons learned already at the start of this plan in terms of where Saudi is prioritizing that diversification and any challenges that stick out to you at the moment which were not perhaps expected when Saudi set out on this?
In any plan or any strategy, there are many challenges. But the question is, are we ready to face these challenges? And the answer is yes. Saudi Arabia is facing the challenge of lower oil prices, which will affect the speed of implementing Vision 2030. And that's very normal. We have been through cycles with regard to oil prices, and we are trying to achieve the annual set of projects under the Vision 2030. And the second challenge is the prioritization of the projects. And this has been done from day one. And now it is being revised every day, every month, every year, in order to see if these are our real priorities or we need to change here and there. So don't worry about us. We are in safe hand. We have a group of planners. We are working very hard because there is no other alternative but to diversify our economy and our energy sources.
a lot of uncertainty out there, and it's really thanks to Saudi Arabia that oil prices have stayed where they are really uh, thus far. Do you see 2025 as presenting any challenge for the kingdom in terms of continuing to, if you like, to hold the fort, or is it time for Saudi Arabia to start releasing more of its oil? Where's the sort of, I suppose, pros and cons in that?
Well, it is not only Saudi Arabia, but it is OPEC plus. And the objective of OPEC plus when it was formulated was not to fix prices at certain level or target prices at certain level, but to achieve stabilization and balance in the oil market. Because in the recent years, we have seen a lot of volatility. It was basically because of the uncertainties, as you rightly said, and there are many factors affecting the stability in the market, and that's why you have seen Saudi Arabia, Russia, and other OPEC plus members, 23 members, are desperate and they are trying very hard to play with the quotas and adherence to the quota in order to achieve certain level of stability.
Yeah, and do you think that that group will continue that agenda and strategy regardless of what producers outside of the group do in terms of production levels, etc.? I mean, do you think that is really going to continue? Can that continue as a policy as we see, more production coming out of South America, the US perhaps as well, a little bit this year might blip up as well? Where do you see that going forward, if you like?
Well, we don't see that big problems. The control by OPEC Plus is very strict. And in the past, when they started in 2017, there were some member countries who were not abiding by their quota. And but because of the strict leadership by Saudi Arabia and Russia, we have seen that they are being threatened that either you come back to what you agreed by yourself and nobody else force you to do, or we are all going to be a free rider. There is no place for free rider. If you choose to be free rider, then the whole OPEC Plus will be free rider. And gradually they came back and they abided by the quota and even those who did not or who violate their quota in the past, they compensate. They have been asked to compensate whatever fallout of their quota, and they are great. Now we have more than 90% adherence to the agreements that has been formulated and been put in place.
Okay, that's true. The compliance has definitely improved in the last few months, at least. I mean, subject to market conditions, of course, going forward. I mean, we're talking about supply now, but demand obviously is on the other side of that equation. And we have the China factor, which clearly has been a change. There's a dynamic there that's changing. But I'd like to talk a little bit about what's obviously been dominating headlines the last couple of weeks, which is tariffs, trade, and how those threats from the US or even positions that it may take going forward on trade tariffs are going to be met by the oil industry. I mean, what big oil producers such as Saudi Arabia, how concerned are they about this sort of mostly unpredictability of what's going to come next? I don't think we're going to get any clarity anytime soon as well. How should large NOCs handle that, do you think, going forward?
Well, uncertainty and vague pictures are always dominating the oil markets. there are those who are speculating and spreading rumors here and there in order to make profits, and those military action here and there that affect supply. So we are taking that into firm account, but we realize that this is going to be with us for some time, and stability is the name of the game. So I think Saudi Arabia and other OPEC plus countries will strive hard to achieve stability and balance in the oil market.
In China, a huge consumer of Saudi Arabia's oil and other obviously suppliers. We are beginning to see gasoline demand peak, diesel demand peak, with all the economic shifts that are happening in that economy, and of course, its own sort of energy transition as well into battery cars, EVs, and renewables. Perhaps not total oil, crude oil is peaking there, but we're beginning to see signs on the product side. I'd like to talk a bit about China and Saudi, because of course Saudi Arabia has invested also on its own home turf and in China into the petchem industry, which is seen as a growth area for future oil demand, if you like. Is that, are we going to grow increasingly dependent on that particular sector to support, if you like, oil production?
Well, you cannot take one element and say, and especially if it is hypothetical, like energy transition. Energy transition is more of a dream than reality. The world will not transit from oil to other renewables and other sources of energy. That is very far away from happening. But at the same time, China, they are saying, well, there is slowdown in China, but this is a short-term phenomena that you cannot say that this will continue for year 2025 or after. And they are expanding their economy by putting some measures, physical measures, and they are doing a lot in order to recover from whatever temporary slowdown. So I'm not that pessimistic with regard to China oil demand. By the way, demand for oil from China is composing most of the increase in the demand for oil worldwide.
It is, of course, in total volume, it's still a big support there. But in relative terms, obviously, when we look at China's economy and what's happening there are some shifts in its total GDP growth. And of course, the transition isn't going to happen overnight, but there's some, there's some changes there, obviously, on the ground, and if only for it to tackle its pollution issue and not necessarily its oil independence, dependence on oil imports.
It will not happen in your lifetime, by the way.
Well, yeah, it won't be completed, but yeah, I mean, there are a lot of cynics out there, but yet, Dr. Mohammed, a
Oil,
lot of money is
oil,
still being plowed into the energy transition, including by Saudi Arabia.
but
I mean,
now with the removal of subsidy of $400 billion in the United States, how come this will finish? And the withdrawal of President Trump from Paris Agreement, that's could be the end of the transition in a physical manner.
and I mean,
And also, if no Paris Agreement, there
yeah.
will be no finance from industrialized countries who are responsible for whatever greenhouse gases emissions happen. And developing countries will they have priorities. They will go to, and after their priorities, they are not going to be developing renewables, and that's very serious.
Of course, I mean, the funding has to be there for the developing world, coming from, as you said, the industrialized countries, and that commitment has been very, has fallen short, let's say, over the years, and all the sort of in year after year at the COP meetings. Let me just
It
one more
was
last.
it was dying. And
Yeah,
now with the withdrawal of the United States, it will be almost dead.
yeah,
So
yeah.
don't rely heavily on whatever financial commitments being committed by industrialized countries.
Yeah, well, I mean, the United States is not just withdrawing its commitment from the Paris Agreement, from many other things, from a funding point of view. Clearly, a lot of change is happening. Dr. Mohammed, before we let you go, I did want to just circle back to Saudi Arabia and talk a bit about gas, because gas is being seen as a transition fuel, meaning that it's going to be, in demand much more, even if you do believe that we're trying to sort of, I suppose, transition away from oil from a pollution point of view. The other part of it is, of course, we can clean the oil that we're producing. A lot of investment going into that technology. But gas, I just want to ask you, because Saudi Arabia is taking its gas production more seriously in recent years, as its demand for power grows, etc., perhaps as a way to release more of its oil for export. Where do you see the gas story for Saudi Arabia going as we go towards 2030?
Good question. Lately, Saudi Arabia discovered huge amount of gas, conventional and non-conventional. That mean we start to be moving to the war toward the second or third producer and owner of the reserve of natural gas. And in very few years, we will be net exporter of natural gas. But let me say one thing, that the climate agreement, by the way, I used to be the head of Saudi delegation to the
That's right.
UNFCCC for 30 years. And we struggled a lot because the double standard of the West was torturing. They are saying something and they do something else. Look at UK. They are giving permits to oil and gas fields while they are asking Aramco, Saudi Aramco, to stop producing oil. That's nonsense. And also the United States now, the President Trump, including whatever he always faces us with, is saying that, well, we are going to
Yeah.
expand our oil production regardless of whatever Paris Agreement. By the way, we are not member of Paris Agreement anyway. So they are opening production, and even though they are opening production, we see that there is a lot of hesitance on the part of producers in the United States.
Yes, that's right.
It doesn't depend on orders from Trump or anybody else, but it depends on the cost benefit analysis for these companies, and especially the shale oil. Shale oil is still relatively has higher cost than the regular oil.
Of
And
course.
yeah, and that is why we are not expecting that much increase in the oil production in the United States, regardless of whatever President Trump is saying.
That's correct. I mean, and many companies in the States are already saying what you're saying, which is that no matter what, we know it has to make economic sense. And of course, it's the lowest cost producers, such as Saudi Arabia, who will essentially win out as we approach peak oil demand, whenever one believes that might happen.
I
Whether it's
don't
in
believe you.
5 years or in 20 years or 30 years, the lowest cost producer will be there. But
50
Dr.
years,
Mohammed,
50 years,
50
50
years,
years.
well, Dr. Mohammed Sabban, thank you so much for joining us on Halftime
Thank
Talk.
you.
I'm afraid we're out of time, but we wish you the best and Saudi Arabia the best in its energy future. And thanks for taking the time to talk to us today.